So thank you for joining us today. This is Kathryn Bingham from LEADistics, and I have with me as a guest Kris Boesch. Now, Kris has a wonderful website that I encourage folks to visit called Choose People. She is the CEO and founder of Choose People, a company that transforms workplace cultures, and there's much more to that I will get to, but she also is here because she has authored a wonderful book, Culture Works: How to Create Happiness in the Workplace. And I love the statement, Kris, that you have at the very beginning, that when people feel good about coming to work, it ripples into the community, into the homes and the coffee shops and the parks and the ball fields. When people are happy at work, they are better parents, spouses, volunteers, and citizens. When we make the workplace better, we make the world better. And so thank you so much for taking some time to join me today.
Kathryn, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
So tell me, who is it? Who's that primary target audience that you intend for reading Culture Works?
So I would say my primary audience tends to be those who are leading or managing teams that are really aspirational as far as wanting to improve their workplace culture. And so that's, at the end of the day, the audience really is intended for leaders and managers of teams.
That's great. Now, I know that at Choose People, you write in your book that the mission is to increase joy in the workplace, and you talk about vision as something happening in about 3 years, and yours is to shift the national conversation around the workplace from one of woe to one of joy. So share a thought or two on why this is so important.
I think it's so important because I think it's heartbreaking that, we spend a minimum of, if you're a full-time worker, we spend a minimum of 2,000 hours of our life each year in our workplace. And I find it disheartening when I go to, a gathering, or, cocktail parties are rare. But right, if you go to a cocktail party and you ask someone about their work, more often than not, it's the response is not one that has joy in it, right? It's like, yeah, it's okay, or it's a job, or it's a paycheck, or I hate my boss, or I hate my coworkers, or there's a lot of negative responses when it comes to people's workplaces. And it just, for me, I think there's such a potential impact in our communities when people feel good about coming to work. And then the other piece of that I think is incredibly important is that it also helps the financial sustainability and the financial freedom of our businesses and of our organizations, so that those, every business is in business because they solve a pain, or they, make more time or cause more ease, and they can have more of an impact if they have more financial freedom. And so there's really that piece as well.
That's great. That's great. Now, one of the things that, obviously we're talking today about your book, all right? And so one means of communicating the key messages and what's important is the book. People can buy it. We will encourage them to do so. But they can also engage in other ways to learn about how culture works and how to create happiness in the workplace. What are some key takeaways that you hope readers get from reading the book itself?
I think, part of it, right, so the book is really intended for, you have a challenge, you have a culture challenge, this book should solve it. This book should give you a tool that you can literally take to your team, or even sometimes a mindset shift that you can take to your team. So whether you're in the pains of gossip or apathy or silos or, culture of comparison, or boomers and millennials that don't get along, or old school and new school, or baggage that no one will let go of, right? There really is this intention that we want to have more meaningful recognition, or we want to have a performance review process that is actually meaningful and not a slog and drudgery, but at the same token really acknowledges when people are successful with character and competency or when they're struggling with it. But I'd say big picture, overarching, one of the things I always come back to is that every single individual on your team, in order to have a successful workplace culture, genuinely needs to know three pieces. And one is that they're known, right? They're witnessed by their team. They're known as an individual, their preferences, their strengths, their struggles. They also have to feel like they matter, that their work matters, that their contribution matters, that if they slack, it matters. If they go above and beyond, it matters. And then last, that they're included, that there's this sense of belonging, and being kind of having this shared identity with the team, or you could even say the tribe. Mm-hmm. And so those three pieces are kind of the overarching, and all the tactical pieces, if you will, really are to feed those three entities of being known, matter, and included.
I love that. And I also will point out that one of the elements that's really helpful for your book for individuals who find out they have one problem or another, or they learn, they're struggling with an element of culture, is that your book is written with, here's some information, and then here's an exercise that you can go out and do, or here's a resource that you can try. It's sort of very much the field manual version of implementing a positive culture. I'd love to touch on a couple things that struck me that I think are helpful, because leading and creating a positive workplace can also take a lot of courage on the part of a leader. And one of the things that surfaced in this for me was your analogy of the crew versus the passengers, right, on page 52. So imagine that you have this boat and everybody is rowing, but is everybody rowing? Are some people sort of slacking off? Or maybe they're rowing, but they're rowing really hard in the wrong direction. Or perhaps they are struggling to row because they're new. So a leader has the challenge when the team members aren't all rowing in cadence to address it, and that takes some courage. Could you speak to that a moment, that that sometimes there might be someone on the team that perhaps isn't helping to create the workplace culture that it's aspired to, and what do you need to do if you're that leader?
So, right, if you're that leader, you have been given, or manager, or supervisor, or, whatever the label is that you use, but you have been given the honor, the responsibility, and the authority to really be a stand for the success of every single person on your team. And what that means is that if someone is struggling, right, if they're not bringing to the table the level of competency that you need, where their performance is subpar, or they're not bringing the level of character to the table that you need as far as like their attitude and their behavior and, following through on your values as your organization, it is absolutely your job. Like, you literally have been, given the authority where it's your responsibility to be a stand for the success of that person, and you have to go talk to them directly. I mean, like, listen, like, I see that you're struggling on the performance side, like, I know we gave you this training, or maybe we didn't do a great job at the training, or do you need a mentor, or do we need to get, there's all those different pieces where you're checking in, like, how can I support you? And the same thing on the character side, right? If you have someone who constantly in meetings is rolling their eyes, right? Or is constantly distracted, or makes rude comments, or tries to dominate the conversation and steamrolls, those are things that, right, are really killing that person's credibility with the team. For you not to say anything, right, because you don't want to hurt their feelings, is really an unkind niceness. Right, there is really a piece where you have to go to that person and be like, I don't know if you realize, but there, you have a blind spot from where I'm sitting, and we all have blind spots. But again, as a person who's a stand for your success, like, I really want you to know the impact that has on the team when you roll your eyes, when you steamroll, and so let's talk about how that could look differently. Let me support you in figuring out how to actually shift that, because that's one of the pieces, Kathryn, that I see a lot, where a manager will go to an employee and say, they'll be courageous, and they'll be like, listen, like, you really need to have a more positive attitude. Your negative attitude is really impacting the team. And the person you're talking to might even be like, you're absolutely right. Even my spouse says, I should have a more positive attitude. You're not the first person to tell me this. Like, you're right. And the manager walks away feeling really good, like, yay, like, I had the courage. They rose to the occasion. They agreed, onward and upward. But what's missing in that conversation is if that person knew how to have a more positive attitude, like, they'd already have one. So there's this piece of supporting them in, like, how would it look different? How would it feel different? What words would be different? How would they show up differently? Are there mantras they can use? Is there a penny in their pocket that they touch? Is there an apology that needs to be made to the team so that it can, there can be a new filter in which that person can be seen, and where they can even ask for help from the team of, like, hey, you guys, this is something I really struggle with. Like, it's almost unconscious that I roll my eyes. Like, I'm not even fully aware of it. And I want you guys to call me out on it, because I really do want to get rid of this habit, but I'm not always aware of it, which is part of why it's my blind spot. And I don't want you guys to think I don't care and that I'm blowing you off. And
exactly.
So there's a whole how do you actually shift it. That's really key, that I think, again, not for lack of, there's no malintent, right? The manager wants to help them shift it, but there isn't. Sometimes you have to go to outside resources, right? Like, you look for an article, or you find a mentor for them, or right? It's not that sometimes managers are like, I don't know how to shift that. I just do that naturally. I don't know how to actually do that. And you can always say to the employee, hey, go research how to do that and come back and let me know what you find out. Like, it doesn't have to all be on you as the manager to make that happen.
I agree. And I think that very often, even in performance evaluations, we'll have that vague, you need to be better at X. But then they either won't provide examples or they don't provide the how. And the employee is left mystified as to what it is that they can do. So being very clear, being very courageous, but pairing the how so that it helps them to make that next step different. One of the other things that I appreciated is that you included some advice around virtual teams. It's more visible to have culture when everybody on the team is co-located. But could you speak to a moment about what's having that positive culture in a virtual team looks like or feels like? Is it the same? Is it different? What do you have to do to enable positive culture in a virtual team?
It's interesting, Kathryn. Right, I have my whole culture audit as a service that I provide, and the culture audit includes a diagnostic, which actually that's included in the book. Where we literally measure, do your employees feel good about coming to work? And in the book, you can find out, like, do you feel good about coming to work based off of the factors from our research? But the organization that has scored the highest in my 7 years of doing this is a virtual team, which I never, ever, ever would have guessed. I would have thought, it's so much easier to have, a thoughtful, intentional workplace culture when everyone physically is in proximity to one another. And this particular team, bar none, one of the main reasons why they are so successful as a team, period, virtual or not, is their commitment to really, again, kind, candid, and constructive communication, in which they don't beat around the bush. They're really clear about what they need. They stay in constant communication with one another. Things are not taken, they're taken for, like, how can we improve this project? There's really honest conversations. There's a deep level of trust. There's a playfulness. There's a humor. There's not a bunch of couching of things. Issues get addressed really quickly. There's a sense where each one of them plays a really important role, and they also understand the roles of their coworkers, so they have the interdependency awareness. And it's one of those things where they're really on top of it, and they do interview for conversational aptitude. They do interview for listening aptitude, which, and just kind of acumen, do you genuinely know how to listen to people in a way where you're responding to what they just said, where you're versus just thinking about what you're going to say next and those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. So it's fascinating, because that was a huge lesson learned for me, is that, no, you don't. You might think that being virtual is a huge barrier to having an extraordinary workplace culture, and it doesn't need to be. I think that's a false assumption that I had made, and that I no longer believe in.
I think, I've worked virtually and I've worked face-to-face, and I think what you've hit on is really important, that in the virtual space, if individuals are highly intentional about how they're creating that virtual workspace, it does work extremely well. But sometimes if they have a dysfunctional co-located team, and then those people try to work virtually, some of those same problems get magnified. And that's probably where the idea of the barrier comes from, is having been in some of those or heard the stories about some of those. So I find it really encouraging that it's possible to score exceptionally highly being a virtual team, because I do a lot of my work virtually. And so you have to be, acutely aware of what is occurring that's different than when you're able to engage with someone face to face. And you may or may not have visual cues, because if you're not on Skype or FaceTime or another method, or if everything is by text and email, how are things coming across? So let's touch on, ideally an organization might start with a culture survey or audit to know where they are and to, prioritize a set of opportunities to create that happiness fostering workplace. What are two really simple actions that, in advance of doing a more formal activity, that they can implement right now in their workplace that benefits everyone?
So one of the very first things I recommend, and again, not every organization has to go through some big culture audit, right? That's just one of those where if an organization's it's our number one priority this year, and we're working on our employment brand, and we've got to get better at retention and recruitment because our turnover is brutal, or it's hard to, the workforce is really challenging, right? So the whole intention of the book is that, if you want to go through a culture audit, do that, but the book really, the whole intention is to be able to get all of these tools, and I'll answer your question, Kathryn, but to get all these tools that you can implement today without having to go through some big shindig. Mm-hmm. So I just think that's important. So the first thing I would just say, especially if you're a manager or leader of a team, we've all been there where we ask someone on our team, how you doing today? And you will get a socially acceptable pat response of fine, good, another day in paradise, right? And as a manager, you might be like, cool, I checked in with my people, now I've got to go get work done, right? You've got a million things that you're running around trying to make happen. But the truth of the matter is you actually don't have any more information than when you started with.
Right.
You actually don't know how that person's doing. And so, super simple, and again, it's in the book, but it's the temperature check. I call it the temperature check. So instead of asking someone, how are you doing today, all you do is you say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing today? And then that person, right, the very first time you ask that question, you'll learn a little bit more about their number, right? Because someone else's 5 can be someone else's 7, which can be someone else's, right? So even though, 7 usually means fine, less than 7, you have to wonder a little bit. More than 7, they're probably doing pretty good. But we have our analytical types where 5, 5 is fine. But the next question is actually more important than that first one. So you ask, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing today? They give you an answer, and if it's in that 5, 6, 7, 8 range, right, that's when you have an opportunity to ask, well, what would make that a +1? Mm-hmm. And that's when you genuinely actually learn. You learn, right? And about what could be better. And for them, they might say, my cat wouldn't be sick. Like that's what would make it a +1. Nothing that you have control over, but where you can say, oh man, I hear you. I hope your cat gets better.
Right.
It could be personal. It could be professional. But then the other chance that the next week or 2 weeks later, you can ask the same question. And if their number has gone up, then you're like, sweet, hey, last time you were a 5 and now you're a 7. Like, what shifted? What's happening? Mm-hmm. But again, it could be something in their personal life or their professional life. And then obviously if their number goes lower, ooh, what's going on? Like, anything I can help you with? Right? So it's just a really quick way to get real information that you can, again, either celebrate or support based off of what the feedback is. And there's also something where the employee genuinely has to kind of own that number. Because if they go to their coworker and are like, yeah, this place sucks, hopefully their coworker's like, well, did Mary ask you, did she ask you the 1 to 10 question? Like, how'd you answer it? Because she's the only one who can actually do anything about it. So, you have to be straight with her. So there's a little bit of accountability within, like, your response and your communication with your supervisor around it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love it when there can be something really simple that people can go implement. So we've talked about a lot of components of the book and how people can use it and some elements of culture itself and why it's so important. What's one thing I haven't asked you that you'd like listeners or readers to be aware of or to be thinking about?
I think one piece that's really important is I think it's not that hard. So I think managers and leaders have a lot on their plate, a lot that they're trying to make happen, a lot that they're responsible for, probably metrics that they're trying to hit. And there can be this sense of like, man, I just don't have the bandwidth to also do this culture stuff. It's just too hard. It's a lot. It's intangible. I don't really know what to do or what's needed. And it feels like it's going to be a huge time suck that I don't have. Or that it's just going to be really hard. And there are those moments when, yes, you do have to be courageous. And that can be hard, right? But it's not where, you're not being asked to find a huge financial investment to be able to make it work or where your hours and hours and hours are going to be required. And I think there's just an awareness of like when you get the culture right, everything else becomes so much easier. And productivity is easier, and you've got synergies, and you've got catalytic collaboration, and all sorts of, and there's just magic and goodness that's going on. And so it's one of those things that, one, obviously it's worth putting time and attention towards, but two, it really isn't that hard, right? It is as simple as some of the things like the temperature check. It's not as much heavy lifting. I think people think culture is really hard, and it doesn't need to be.
And I love that there's a lot of things that are in your book that are free, right? It doesn't cost anything to take that temperature check, right? It doesn't cost anything to ask certain questions, and you get that feedback that allows you to work on it. So I think, there's this perception that you always have to do the big survey or the 2-day offsite. Exactly. And there's a productivity cost to that, but at the same time there can be value that comes out of it, but it doesn't always have to start that way. There's a lot of things that are easy to implement within the book. So to close us out today, first, Kris Boesch, our guest, has been awesome. She is CEO again of Choose People, and the book we've been talking about is Culture Works, How to Create Happiness in the Workplace. Kris, thanks so much for sharing your time and your expertise. What's the best way for readers or listeners to learn more, and your preferred way of having them get in contact with you?
So I'd say bar none, one is just, again, you mentioned earlier, choosepeople.com is our main website. The book is available on cultureworksbook.com. And again, plethora of information in the book. But also, if you want to sign up for our weekly culture tip, it's free. And again, it's very tool-based, very mindset shift-based, where, again, each week you'll get a little nugget in your inbox that's like, hey, try this on, go run with this with your team. So just know that that's available, and we just send out one a week. We don't do any other kind of spam or anything like that. So that's probably the best way, and, always feel free to reach out to me. It's Kris with a K, K-R-I-S, at choosepeople.com. If you had a specific question, I'd be happy to answer it.
That's fantastic. Well, if you have been listening to this as a podcast, thanks so much for taking the time and growing your leadership with us today. This is Kathryn Bingham from LEADistics, and I encourage you to go forth, and do great things. Thank you.